October 2021, Newcastle United were sitting 19th in the Premier League table, staring down the barrel of relegation. And then they were suddenly taken over by Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, a sovereign wealth fund managing roughly $700 billion. Fast forward 3.5 years later, and they're fighting for Champions League spots. Today in this explainer, we are going to break down this complete financial transformation. We're tracking every single pound spent, what it actually achieved on the pitch, and what the next massive phase of this project looks like. But to really grasp the sheer scale of this overhaul, we've got to quickly rewind to that bleak October in 2021. The reality for the club was, frankly, grim. They were completely winless, sitting in 19th place, trapped in the relegation zone, and carrying the absolutely crushing weight of a fan base that hadn't seen their beloved team win a major trophy since 1955. It was a club entirely defined by years and years of stagnation. And then, literally overnight, everything flipped. One of the most powerful financial forces on the planet walked through the door. At the time of the takeover, Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, or PIF, was sitting on about $700 billion in assets. Just let that number sink in for a second. The poorest-run club in the league had just become, on paper at least, the richest club in world football. But as we're going to see, infinite wealth doesn't exactly mean infinite freedom in modern football. Stick around because at minute 7, we reveal Newcastle's Phase 2 financial plan and why it targets one specific market that changes their entire commercial trajectory. They're facing a billion-pound bottleneck right now, and the payoff to that dilemma is massive. Okay, Section 1, the takeover and the scale. Let's break down the actual details of the deal. The initial purchase price was £305 million, which honestly is a total bargain for a Premier League club with a fan base this massive. At first, PIF took an 80% stake, with PCP Capital Partners and RB Sports and Media taking 10% each. But cut to July 2024, and PIF bought out PCP's stake, bumping their total ownership up to 85%. Make no mistake, this is now unambiguously a Saudi state-backed project. So how does this fit into the global picture? Well, PIF is the core financial engine of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 initiative. They started with that $700 billion in 2021, right? But by 2026, that figure is projected to swell to somewhere between $925 billion and $1.15 trillion, aiming for a wild $2 trillion by 2030. To put that into perspective, that £305 million purchase price for Newcastle, it's basically a rounding error on PIF. Now, we do have to acknowledge the broader context here, because this takeover was and remains highly divisive. On one side of the coin, you have critics and human rights organizations raising serious objections. They point directly to sports washing, which is when a state uses a high-profile sports team to distract or sanitize its human rights record. On the flip side, you have the Newcastle fans, who largely viewed this takeover as their one and only lifeline out of a dark era of club mismanagement. The Premier League ultimately gave the green light, but only after getting legally binding assurances that the Saudi state wouldn't directly control the club. It's a highly complex reality, and both of these perspectives exist at the exact same time. Moving on to Section 2, the £650 million plus squad rebuild. We need to bust a really common myth right out of the gate. You'll hear a lot of people say Newcastle's new owners spent £300 million on the squad. Not true. The actual gross spend under PIF is comfortably over £650 million. That's roughly €787 million. Even when you factor in player sales, their net spend still sits around €470 million. The financial injection into this wage bill and roster has been absolutely immense. But here's the thing. They didn't just throw that cash at random aging superstars. They actually executed a really methodical foundational build. Back in January 2022, they snagged Bruno Guimaraes for about £37 million. That was an elite top 6 caliber midfielder joining a team nowhere near the top 6. Then came Alexander Isak in the summer of 2022 for £63 million. And if we look ahead to how they plan to operate, look at 2025. They sell Isak for a British transfer record, cashing in right at his peak, and seamlessly drop £69 million on Nick Voltemade. They went from just blindly spending cash to building a highly sustainable asset base. Has it been flawless? Of course not. The hits were absolute game changers. Guimaraes, Isak, Anthony Gordon, Sven Botman, those guys were the reason the club skyrocketed to a 4th-place finish and secured Champions League football. But then you have the complications. Take Sandro Tonali. They brought him in for roughly 55 to 60 million pounds, and almost immediately he was hit with a massive ban for breaching betting rules. That was a huge fee completely wiped out for a season, which just proves that squad building carries monumental risks, no matter how deep your pockets are. Okay, let's hit pause for a second. Because despite all this incredible recruitment and limitless wealth, there is a giant roadblock. The most important financial decision Newcastle haven't made yet has absolutely nothing to do with buying players. You can buy the best starting 11 on earth, but if you don't fix this next problem, your trillion-dollar football project has a hard ceiling bolted right onto it. Which brings us to Section 3, St. James Park, the capacity trap.
52,264. That is the exact seating capacity of Newcastle's historic St. James Park. And the crazy part? After 4 years of being owned by the richest fund in the sport, that number hasn't changed by a single seat. They overhauled the entire team, but the physical stadium remains exactly as they found it.
And if you want to know why that's holding them back, just look at the matchday demand. When they played Barcelona in the Champions League, there were over 110,000 supporters sitting in a virtual queue trying to get tickets. They could have sold out their current stadium twice over. And why does this matter? Because in modern football, matchday revenue is one of the very few income streams that isn't capped by strict financial rules. Every fan who can't get into the stadium is money just left on the table. Meanwhile, rivals like Arsenal and Manchester United are easily pulling in massive revenue from their 60,000 and 70,000 seat arenas every single weekend. So you're probably thinking, just build a bigger stadium, right? Well, here is that Phase 2 dilemma we talked about. St. James Park is completely boxed in by dense city center real estate and heritage buildings. So the ownership faces two brutal choices. Option 1, they expand the current stadium to about 60,000 seats. The fans keep their historic home, but the financial upside is incredibly limited. Option 2, they build a brand new, state-of-the-art 70,000-seat stadium just down the road at Lees's Park. This is the real Phase 2 ambition. A new build maximizes matchday revenue and clears the path for a massive naming rights deal, tying directly into Vision 2030 and letting them aggressively target the lucrative Asian commercial market. It turns the club into a billion-pound, year-round global hub. But it faces fierce local opposition. Tens of thousands of people have signed petitions to protect the city's oldest public park. It is a massive fight between the balance sheet and the soul of the city, and they still have to make a choice. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, PSR and the financial flywheel. So why are they obsessing over stadium revenue when their owners have $2 trillion in the bank? Because of PSR, profit and sustainability rules. These are Premier League regulations designed to limit exactly how much money a club can lose over a 3-year ruling period. It effectively caps owner cash injections. You literally cannot just dump oil money into your club to buy your way to the top. Every single team has to answer to PSR. And the irony of this rule is just incredible. The widespread myth is that Newcastle has endless spending power. But the reality? In the summer of 2024, the richest owners in global sports were actually forced to sell their own highly rated homegrown youth players, Elliot Anderson and Yankuba Minte, just to balance the books before the PSR deadline. Even a $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund can't just outspend the rulebook. So how do you actually win the game under these restrictions? You build the financial flywheel. Generating legitimate, organic revenue is the only way out of the PSR trap. Step 1, you earn that massive Champions League revenue through prize money and gate receipts. Step 2, you use that clean money to sustainably fund squad upgrades. Step 3, a stronger squad wins more matches. Step 4, winning gets you right back into the Champions League to earn even more money. This sustainable cycle, eventually turbocharged by that future stadium expansion, is the actual financial engine driving the Saudi project. It's not a blank check, it's a meticulously calculated flywheel. Which leaves us with one final thought to wrap up today's explainer. We've traced this incredible rise from 19th place to the Champions League spots. We've broken down that massive £650 million investment into the squad. And we know there is a monumental billion-pound commercial and stadium decision looming just on the horizon. So, considering all of this structured financial engineering and the incredibly strict PSR limits they have to navigate, can Newcastle United realistically win the Premier League within the next 5 years? Take everything you've learned today, let that question sink in, and let's see how this plays out. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.